and she feels like it ruined her.
We are live. Oops. Wait, can we go back and start over? I don't want to talk about the dog. Right. Sorry, everybody. We're gonna reboot this. Mm, I didn't. You sure? Oh,
I
all right.
did.
Well, I'm told
Okay.
I'm told that I did not issue the spoiler I worried about. So, okay. So here we are. What a treat this is. Thanks, virtual audience and real audience, for joining us tonight. We love hosting debut authors. It's one of our very best things that we do here because if we don't nurture new voices at some point, it's on. See, I told you. We really ought to start this over. Rob will kill us. It is on. Yeah,
Now it's on. I can hear it.
now it's on. So I have to start over again? Okay, all right. So let's start over again now that the microphone is on. Good evening, everyone. Thank you, virtual audience, for joining us, and thank you guys for coming out tonight. It's always a treat to host a debut author because I think one of the most important things we do here at the Poison Pen is nurture new voices and introduce them to you. Since, as we have been here for 35 and a half years, plenty of authors that we have loved and followed have also been writing for 35 and a half years, and at some point, um, we need a new batch, right? I know it's really kind of scary sometimes to think about how that goes. So, Elizabeth Kaufman, and here she is with a book called Ruth Run, which is really fun and extremely interesting in the issues that it raises about cybersecurity, about artificial intelligence, about human agency, all kinds of things. So, Elizabeth, welcome.
Thank you.
You are entirely welcome. So, tell me how you got interested in writing. It's a thriller. How you got interested in this story?
Well, my background's in tech,
Okay.
and many years ago, I walked in. There's a lab, which doesn't spoil anything for the book, but at a certain point, our hero gets her inspiration. She walks into a lab where there are people who are finding backdoors in microchips and setting commercial products on fire. And that lab was a lightly fictionalized version of a lab that existed and still exists. And I walked into when I was working for Lockheed Martin, and I was exploring the idea of putting commercial products in a big black satellite network. And somebody, I'm not even sure how I got there, but somebody said, you should go check these guys out. And I walked in, and they had all these things. I remember a Walkman sitting out, and I didn't even know you could get to a Walkman over the air, and they were tap, tap, tapping, and the thing caught fire. And
You mean arsonists at work?
yeah, and then they laughed madly, and I said, what is happening in this lab? And their job was, and I think still is, to find undocumented bad things in the silicon that we all use every day. And apparently, I was very tedious about this lab to everyone who knew me. And so when many, many years later, a good friend of mine dared me to write a novel, she told me that if I could find a way to make it fun, I could stick that lab in there that I was so tedious about. And so I knew that I wanted to work that in somewhere because it was one of those things I walked out thinking differently about the world. And, okay, hold it up more. Anyway, so I knew I wanted to have the lab in there, but I also knew it had to be a fun book. That was the assignment, and that's what I wanted to do. And it's not fun to have somebody walk in and be horrified. And so
You
the
mean
book,
set everything on fire?
well, yeah, I wanted somebody to walk into that lab and see it as an opportunity. I asked myself, what kind of person would walk into this place, see this happen, and get excited about it? Versus me, I got all serious and worried and, boring, apparently.
Okay, so what they're seeing are backdoors and microchips?
Yeah, that was specifically what they were looking for. And for me, because my background is not in microchip design, it was the first time I really understood. And things have changed a little bit recently. I can hear all my Intel friends screaming. But at the high-end chip manufacturers, they have a little bit better fail-safes now. It's not perfect. But when all of this technology was coming up, it was true that you would write a spec and say, here's your power budget, here's your heat budget, and I need this chip to do these 10 things, and here's how much space you have on the board, and so forth. And you'd get a chip back, and then you could check for the 10 things or the 50 things. But if there were 5 extra things that someone put in there, you would never find them. And that's what Ruth realizes early on, is that if she controls the design of a microchip, she can add something.
Okay.
And no one will ever find it. And that's what she does. So she, because her ambition is to be very rich, she would like to be a bank robber. And when she realizes she can add something to a microchip, this is her path. So she, adds something to a microchip, makes sure it gets spread around. She goes to work in the valley, and it's basically a modern heist story.
I love it, but she's not drilling into the vault at the bank. She's
No.
actually roughing it through. That's a really great idea. I love that. It is. Right. No, it's I was reading a thriller today by Brad Taylor, who's going to be here a week from Sunday, and the stakes there are the discovery of a great rare, I mean fictional, of a big rare earth deposit in India, and the Chinese will do anything to prevent them from developing it because, and that. Am I wrong? Because I'm a tech idiot, but doesn't that have something to do with chip production and so forth?
Yeah, well, they're all the rare earth
Right.
elements, and also for, all of the hybrid technology, the alternative power cars and everything, the batteries, and all those rare earth elements are one of the critical things.
Right. So as I was reading my way, it's really funny. I mean, when I read some of these, military thrillers, I have no more idea what's actually going. I don't understand the weaponry. I'm just like, but I do. I mean, the story is terrific. But even I could understand that the idea of a giant new rare earth deposit that would give India a chance to really swing at China would be something the Chinese would like to shut down.
Yeah, sounds right.
Yeah, and then he goes on to talk about in military parlance, but also sort of what you're talking about the gray area. That actual combat, is less an instrument of war right now than it is, all these other disinformation, cybersecurity, all the rest of it. That military operations are less about weaponry on the field now, and they are about other sorts of things.
Well, and in the beginning, because the book obviously took a couple years to get out there, I was telling people, no, this is real. This happens. And then Israel blew up all those pagers.
I was thinking about
yeah,
that. Yeah.
And I was like, well, I don't actually know the mechanism, but it almost doesn't matter whether you're using chips or firmware or whatever. The idea that you are able to modify commercial products, and then we used to call it an HCF command, halt and catch fire, and
Okay.
and that's. And she doesn't something like that. Only her interest is just in robbing banks, and she wants to be rich, and she gets this stuff out there, and that's what she's doing quietly.
She is doing that quietly, but unsurprisingly, she runs into people who, if she's running, it's for a reason, right?
Yes.
So what puts her on? Because actually, this evolves into a real cat and mouse kind of a thriller. That's the background, but that's not what the whole book is about by any means.
Yeah,
There's some other.
The setup is that she's doing that, but the book opens. It turns out that very early on in her career, she's caught the eye of somebody who has basically been surveilling her since even before she had her plan in place. So she's had somebody watching her and, in a creepy way, following her to see what she's going to do. And at a certain point, he comes under pressure and makes a move that alerts her that her network of, her little heist network has been discovered, and she runs. And so she crosses out of this world of kind of abstract high tech, and it turns into kind of a car chase. I mean, she goes cross country across Interstate 80. with many truck stops because I love truck
Oh,
stops.
do you? I wondered why there
Yes,
were so many.
so many truck
Right.
stops. But that's also just how you travel that road. But I do love truck stops and everything in them. So, in a way, this is my love letter to American truck stops
And
and the weird
unsurprisingly,
food.
she meets some very crazy people and some bad actors. Um, Unfortunately, we can't talk about a lot of it without giving away much of the book. But I mean, what's interesting is that she's a survivor, and um, at one point, she's actually tempted to sort of help out, but she doesn't want to give up her 200. She decides in the end she'd like to keep her $200 million and stay rich rather than, maybe do the super right thing. So she's an interesting character. And did you intend this to be like a one-off book? I mean, she's basically at the end, assuming she survives, which we're not going to reveal. Did you intend to do something else?
You mean along the lines of a sequel to this
Yeah.
book? Well, so when I wrote the book, I was just trying to tell a story, and
Okay.
I actually wasn't. I wasn't even really aware that I was writing a novel. I was writing a story for a friend, and that this turned into a published novel was a series of lightning strikes of, I mean, ridiculous story. And so when I was writing it, I was just trying to tell a story and see if I could do it. I got really curious about whether I could actually, write a novel. Um, and since then, the question of a sequel has come up a couple of times.
Or just another book. It doesn't have to be a sequel.
Well, for sure, and for, I mean, I spent. There's a long time, as you know, between when you sell a book and when you see it sitting on a
Two
table.
years as a
Yeah,
general rule, right?
yeah.
For a first novel. Yeah.
So from this was submitted March a year ago, so pretty fast in terms of production. But 2 years. I wrote it 2 years ago, and then there's a lot of waiting around, which I don't do well. It's not my skill, and so I did write something else, but it's in a different vein. It's not. I think there's a little bit of a through line. I'm interested in women who are self-reliant.
Hmm.
I'm not very interested in romances, and I'm tired of reading things where the women kind of stop and say, "Oh no, what shall we do now?" Um, I just don't want to write that. So that's probably the through line is more the nature of the characters more than the actual content. And we'll see where that goes.
Well, a story's a story. It
Yeah.
doesn't have to fit into a particular category. So tell us about some of the other characters. I mean, do we really get to know Ruth in this book? I mean, do you describe her? Do we, how much do we know Ruth?
Well, I think that's a good question. I mean, Ruth is not a character who knows herself
Right.
very well. And she's a character who is in pain, as all people are. She doesn't understand her own pain, and she makes a lot of impulsive decisions, and she makes a lot of mistakes, I think, because she does not really understand the problem that she's trying to solve.
What is it she thinks she's going to do with so much money?
Well,
I mean, that's a lot of money. $200 million, if that's her
okay, I got to
goal.
tell the $250 million story
Oh,
because
okay.
this did not end up in the book, but that number, because I didn't know I was writing a book and I was writing a story for somebody who has heard all my tiresome stories and gets a lot of my little jokes, $250 million was a joke because when I was in my tech career, I worked at a large networking company and got as high as being a general manager, which meant that I was sitting at the table with the VPs at the events where they feed you chicken cordon bleu and put PowerPoints up. And so but I was never part of the conversation, but I got to eavesdrop, which is better. And I sat in on a conversation where all the men, because it was only men, at the table were talking to each other about how much money they felt like they would have to have so that you could retire and not worry about it. And this was in probably 1999. And they were, and one of them was saying, well, my wife is a shopper, so I need more money. And the other was like, well, I like cars, and so I'm sitting there trying to guess what that number would be, young person that I was. And the number that they agreed on was $250 million. That,
Back in 1990?
yes.
Oh my God, that's
It
amazing.
explains a lot. And so that was their number. Oh, this is what I would need to be able to feel like, oh, I could live the life I wanted and retire if I only had this money.
Did they have any actual shot at making $250 million?
Oh yeah, back then, sure.
Really?
That's
In tech?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
That's when people who didn't do anything could make money like that, because it was the stock, it was before, it was pre-bubble popping. So several of those people probably did make close to that.
I mean, it's an interesting thing because, one of the things that really dates crime fiction is money, because, the amounts that seem adequate at the time you write them 10 years down the road are, kind of ludicrous one way or another. The value of money. I just read David Baldacci's World War II book, and, you could buy stuff for like nothing compared to today. And so I think it's always risky to put actual figures, into a book if you want it to have any kind of a shelf life. But I mean, $250 million today still seems like a reasonable amount to
That's a lot
retire
of cheese
on.
pizza, right? I mean,
No kidding.
yeah. So, but that's why I put that number in there.
I see.
And, Ruth is a little weird because she's decided, and money is what she can get. A lot of the things she's missing in her life, she has no idea how to get them. And so she's an American girl, so she's like, I'm sure I can buy it if I don't have it. And the $250 million is what she ends up with, and when she has to stop. And
You mean
run.
when she goes on the run?
Yeah, when she goes on the run and stops, she has to shut down her little network of offshore heist money. And she's got some cash with her, and one of the things about her is that even though she has all this money, she's not very good at using it to solve problems, because she's never had money, and also because it's not maybe the solution to some of her issues. But either way, I mean, she's at several points in the book, there is an opportunity where she maybe could use that money to get herself out of trouble, and it just doesn't occur to her, because she doesn't actually know how to be a rich person. She doesn't know how to go through the world any different than she always has,
So increasingly today, too, cash doesn't work. I mean, there are, I've been reading up because we're going to do foreign travel. You can't actually use cash traveling in Japan. I mean, everything, because everybody has a smartphone and they're all clever. And they've got like Apple Pay and Google Pay and other stuff. But literally cash, the Quebec airport is a cash-free airport because we had Canadian money left when we were there a year ago, and I thought I would spend it, and I couldn't because it was entirely electronic. So if Ruth, therefore you can be tracked. I mean, if you're using your phone or a credit card or anything, it's hard to drift along anonymously.
I would say that I think Interstate 80 is an exception.
It's
to
still
that.
cash.
And where I live, it's actually cash is back, right?
Really?
So that, well, yeah, and there was a period during COVID, I think, when we were all thinking, oh, cash is dead because it's, this vector for disease or whatever it is, or we are never going to see people again. So how can you use cash if you're never in the same room? But cash is very, very powerful out where I live.
Interesting.
For a lot
Do
of
we
reasons.
see people spending actual cash here now very often? Not in my experience. We don't keep much of a cash drawer, do we?
When people get spooked by the economy, they start paying more in cash.
Okay.
So we're seeing more cash payments lately.
Are we?
Yeah.
That's very interesting. Right. So therefore, back to the bank, because I mean, there was a time when we used to go to the bank every day, and then we were going like once a week, if then. And so that's interesting. You think it's gonna? I can see that too. Why people feel more secure if they have actual cash. Right.
Well, and spending cash is one thing. I think people feel like things are cheaper if they have the cash in their hand because, you know, they know it ends here. There's no interest. There's no, but people like to be paid in cash because, of course, they can be fudging their taxes that way also
Right.
um, out. So I think for her, the cash that she has now, how she converts her offshore stuff without getting tracked is a whole different challenge. But if I had to flee across Interstate 80, I've certainly made that drive many, many times. Um, Stopping in all the truck stops and looking at all the weird food, and cash is fine there for almost everything.
So when Ruth starts to run, who does she run into?
Well, she meets some different people. I mean, I think a little bit of her superpower is her ability to switch between worlds. She's transient in every world that she's in. She's one of those people, she's always passing through, but she's pretty good at figuring out what the rules are wherever she is. Um, and so you know, she meets various people along the way as she tries to figure out how to travel without being detected.
And is she's going towards something, or is she just trying to escape somebody?
Well, initially she's just trying to escape, and then she gets tired of running because she's not a very fear-driven character, and her fuse is very, very short for being afraid. So she's afraid for a while, and then she just gets angry and turns around and says, all right, I'm dealing with these people. Initially she thinks I can disappear, I can outrun them, and then they keep coming, and then she gets tired of it.
And so at some point, is there actual law enforcement involved in this story?
Well, some of the people following her are arguably law enforcement. They're not cops, but they are agency people, which
It would be Treasury, wouldn't it? That would be after
no.
her?
Well, no. It's I mean there's a crossover with Homeland Security in this because of another character she runs into because she
Okay.
has fairly poor judgment about her rides that she takes. But the people pursuing her, I mean, I just called them the agency because it was my Silicon Valley used to be, and I think still is, an environment where there was just a ton of surveillance. And if you were working in cryptography, if you were working, in anything interesting, there were always people. Often it felt like they sent the JV team, like the beginner surveillance people, to try and see what you were doing without asking. So when I worked there and I was doing a lot of work negotiating for our encryption products to go around the world, and they were constantly, messing with my home phone. They had a
Really?
van parked outside my apartment. This really irritated me because it was so poorly done. And they broke my phone trying, so I had no dial tone. And I walk out there, and there's this white van with a magnetic sign on it, and the sign reads, "The Phone Company." And so I walk up and knock on the door because I was young and irritable. And the guy, they didn't even have power windows. He rolls it down. I said, "Which phone company?" And he didn't even know. I'm like, "Could you send the real people?" Like, I am humiliated that the people surveilling me are so bad at it that you think that, do you think I won't notice? Like, can you fix my phone? How can you listen in on a call if there's no dial tone, right? And I was like, tell me which, I mean, at least get a real van, right? So
Literally is what it said. The phone.
it said the phone company, and it was one of those, metal, the magnetic stick-on signs. And so So some of that bumbling, because the people following her are occasionally minimally competent, I think.
Sounds
And
like a Mel Brooks movie.
yeah,
It
and
really
it was
does,
just
yeah.
me being irritated and remembering, I hold a grudge for a long time. I think that's part of what makes it fun to write books is all the grudges you can air, and I definitely still have that grudge that they weren't better at. I don't know why I wanted them better at tapping my phone, but I did. I felt,
You said you were humiliated,
yeah,
right?
felt like they should have sent the A team.
So probably the oldest story structure of the world is the journey.
Yes.
You've somebody, the Iliad, the Odyssey, going forward. So basically, Ruth is in that tradition and starting out someplace, and something forces her to undertake a journey. In her case, with no particular destination.
Right. She's trying to disappear, which, and that she thinks she can do it seems misguided.
Okay, pause. That's our tech that I heard the other night. I think there's something wrong with our refrigerator. I heard that. Do you think there's ice or something that falls?
That sounds exactly like
Oh,
ice
okay. Is
falling,
that what it
doesn't
is? Is de-icing itself? It was really creepy the first time it happened. I thought, are we having a minor earthquake? Talk about, terrible tech. Or are we having a minor earthquake or something? So, okay, that makes sense. Right.
Is it proper behavior? Maybe it's doing the right
Well,
thing.
it's a very old appliance, and so I worried that it's telling us that its day is done, and we probably ought to buy a new. I had the same experience with my car when I was driving an author home from a library event in Cave Creek. I knew something was wrong when we pulled up to a light and the engine, was not. That all of a sudden the air conditioning wasn't working, and I thought this is not this is not a good sign. There's something wrong here. So sometimes I think, mechanical things have to speak to you in their own language in order for you to.
It's warning you very politely.
Exactly.
That
Yeah,
was not
I thought my
terrible.
car was saying to me, no, I'm not well. It's time to fix me. I think that might be true with that. Right. So Ruth does meet some other colorful and possibly dangerous people. Is it a whole family or is it a group or?
Yeah, she takes they take a detour, and they end up north in Idaho for a little while.
Idaho.
Jerome, Idaho.
I thought for a moment it was going to be Jerome, Arizona. So I went back and looked more carefully at the text to make sure that it was not Arizona.
No, there's a Jerome, Idaho, which is due north off of Interstate 80. And she ends up there in a religious community that is actually raising alfalfa commercially. That whole area is one of the miracles of irrigation. And they call it actually Magic Valley. It's because irrigation, it's an arid, it's a high arid, like a lot of, up by tie siding, like we were talking about, that area. But they've irrigated it, and it's become this real.
Where's the water come from? The Snake?
Some from the Snake, and I think some of it is from deep aquifers there, because there's a lot of underground water. Probably not so much anymore. But
no, it turns out that farming is what really drains aquifers, as we have found out here in Arizona.
Yes,
yeah.
But similarly, so I think it's mostly actually deep well aquifers, and they bring up with those ag pumps. They're bringing up those the water there, and so she ends up in a community that's raising alfalfa for the most part and barley, but doing. The normal, there's some big farming out there, and it's one of those farms. If you drive through that area, there are big pivots, and then the rest is.
So basically, on a journey, it's really like the Odyssey. You run into Scylla and what's it, Scylla and Charybdis? Do I have that right?
Charybdis. Is it
Charybdis?
The rocks that.
The two rocks. Anyway, Ulysses keeps running into obstacles on his journey that he needs to overcome. But he had a definite destination. He was sailing for home. And Ruth is, on the other hand, running without a particular destination. But she still has that same obstacle-studded course.
And I think the desire for home, I think that's, I think she has, I know she has no way of going about that, but she is a person without a home, and she tends to get distracted when she sees someone else's home, even
Right.
if it's absolutely unsuitable, which is what happens to her. When she gets up in that community, she's very taken by, that somebody knows how to make biscuits and things like that. All those little things. She has this urge to belong, but it doesn't last very long for her. She's not a caretaker at all in her nature,
Right.
and she is not, she doesn't like to be afraid, she doesn't like to be pushed around, and she's not, when people offer her opportunities to take care of them, which is kind of how people solicit young women, right, is they present them with caretaking opportunities and say, and she doesn't even really, she's not good at it, but she also is almost never tempted by it.
So, in your author photo, Patrick, you brought that up. There's a bird.
Red-tailed hawk, her name, my name for her, I shouldn't say her name because she did not, I noticed that she had a name, but her name was Spot. That was my first falconry bird.
You can't really introduce falconry in depth with Ruth here, although there's another animal that comes along.
I have been schooled on how to do this because everybody thinks the falconry's interesting. So I've come up with answers if you like them.
Sure. Tell us about it.
So I have an answer that says writing novels is similar to falconry in the sense that it is this incredible slog, and you don't know until the last 2% of the slog whether you've failed, but it looks really cool. And when people see you be successful, they think you're a real badass, but you have to like the slog because that's the job, is the slog. So that's my novel writing is like falconry. Ruth is, there's probably something there because she's a little bit feral, and there is a little bit of that sense that she looks through things that people want her to look at. I had somebody tell me that they thought she was a male character that I had written as a woman, which I thought was quite...
I didn't think that.
I didn't think that either, but I thought it was fascinating because what they were getting at is she's self-reliant, she's not a caretaker, and if you stand between her and the door, she goes right over you, which is a characteristic of some women and of the woman here. But I thought that was a really odd, revealing comment that maybe said more about the person who made the comment than the book. But she has a little bit of that feral quality and transactional. She's very, very transactional. And falconry birds are entirely transactional. There's no...
You mean they only come back for the food?
Basically, or for knowing, you can build a pattern with them where they understand, because they are predators and they know that it is difficult to be a predator, right? Every predator that has to predate for a living knows that it's hard. And so if you show up and you are predictably making that hard thing easier,
right?
And by the time I trap my birds, some people buy their birds, but by the time I trap my birds, they know. They're young, they've been kicked out, they're trying to hunt, and they've realized, wow, this is really hard. And so if you show up and you reliably give them success hunting and you never steal from them or hurt them or scare them, then they'll stick around for a while because they know that, they don't know why you're doing it, they don't care, but it's easier.
So what kind of falcons do you find?
Well, so I've had a whole range of them. We have an apprenticeship period of 2 years, and in the state of Colorado, that means red-tailed hawks. You can do a kestrel, but I didn't. So you're doing red-tailed hawks. I've had a merlin. I have had, what else have I had? Sharp-shinned hawk, a Sharpie named Lawn Dart. The merlin was Crash. Several red tails. I have a Harris's hawk right now that I had a non-resident trapping permit down in New Mexico. So
Are
he
you
came from
fostering
there.
them, or are you using them commercially, or what are you doing with
No,
them?
you train them up to hunt, and you hunt them. I hunt them for a season or two, and then I release them.
Okay.
And so, and there's federal law and there's state law that applies, and you have to comply
Well,
with
I asked
both.
that because Rob at one point at Poison Pen Press had somebody working for him. Then she quit in order to run a commercial operation using falcons for restaurants and hotels because,
Abatement.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly, because that way the falcons would naturally, all the birds that, assemble on your table for the crumbs and generally do all that. And I think they may be also, flown to get rid of pigeons in some areas and so
Yeah.
forth.
It's a different license, and most places, and I'm sure that that's true here too, you can't use the same bird for both. So you have it on an
Oh,
abatement license, and then you come in and you chase the pigeons and everything, and they're
right.
very good at that. But that can't be a falconry bird. And that's the same is true for education birds. So the birds that go to schools, which are usually non-releasable, they're usually injured or something else.
Hmm.
But they go around, in an educational format as bird ambassadors, so that people will like birds and whatever. And we sometimes do events on National Falconry Day. We'll go stand in the sporting goods store with our birds and show them to people, but they aren't technically education birds, and they're held on a different permit. And the law is pretty tight. I mean, the law's about to go away, and so we'll see what happens with that. But at this exact moment, it's pretty restrictive
Why
what
is
you
the law
do.
about to go away? Is it
They're sunsetting the laws that restrict all of that, the Migratory Bird Act and everything else. There's an executive order.
right? There's no point of our society that they're not trying
Yeah,
to.
exactly.
Yeah, right.
Exactly.
Okay. Well, the birds will have something to say about how that goes too, won't they?
Maybe, yes. I think so. The falconry is really interesting because you can build a relationship of a sort with the birds, but they have no urge to please us. They are not,
Mm.
you know, you can't, there's no discipline, there's no insisting on that they treat you a certain way. And when you release them, they go.
They're gone. Huh?
If you've done your job right, they leave and they're gone.
So I've been in owl sanctuaries. I've been in them in England. I've been in them along the Columbia River. Is it sort of the same thing? Because owls are predators. We had an owl in our neighborhood that destroyed an entire fleet of lorikeets. It lived on the lamppost. There used to be a little flock of lorikeets that would knock on our library windows, sit along the ledge, and all. One day they all disappeared. And then we realized there was an owl. And recently we had an eagle.
That's interesting because lorikeets are fast and owls are pretty
What was the only predator
slow.
the
I wonder if
coyote
they just
wasn't
got
going to get him?
scared and left.
Maybe.
Because owls get a bad rap. I've done some barn owl rehab, and and especially falconers like to talk about owls being stupid, which is code for we can't make them play our game with us. And so they must be stupid, because why wouldn't a bird want to come live with me and do what I want it to do? But they're different, and they're not closely related, right? Obviously, it's they're just because they have feathers and wings and stuff, they're not super closely related to the other birds that we use, but they are really interesting
Yeah, I find owls
animals,
to be absolutely
and they're
fascinating.
beautiful.
Hmm.
They like I have barn owls at home, and I really like them.
Right.
You know.
Well, we've wandered all about.
Yes,
Anybody
we're
have
way off
questions that they would like
topic.
to ask?
Absolutely. So, Elizabeth, what was it about being an engineer that
Hmm.
drew you to writing a heist novel? Because I feel like you have to be very logical in order to write one. There's a series of steps.
Yeah, and I wish I could tell you that I was really organized writing this book, but I wasn't. I just wrote it. But but I think the bigger influence in writing this kind of book is that I got started doing technical writing, and specifically writing introductory level white papers about security architectures or cryptography or whatever. And the first rule of anything like that is that you know that anybody who's reading what you wrote doesn't want to be, right? And they already kind of hate you
That's a
because,
really excellent point. That's
right? I mean, advanced stuff, like Bruce Schneier with his advanced books, there are people who really like crypto and read his books because they like it. But when you're writing at an intro level, anybody reading that book, they're only reading your book because they've resisted every natural impulse to learn it, and they are now being coerced, usually professionally. And so they hate you before they even turn the first page, and they don't want to be there. And it's the same when you're teaching, which I also did. They don't want to be there. And so you have to really respect their time. You have to move fast. It has to be funny. And you have to have a lot of empathy for how much your reader hates you. And so I felt writing this, and I was writing for one person who had dared me, but she's a very busy person. And I felt this pressure that she was not going to be happy when I handed her a whole book she had to read. She was going to feel too busy, and she was going to not want to be there. And so it's that feeling of, I really need to earn your time. I need to earn that page turn. And I need to assume that you kind of don't want to be here. And I think that's probably the bigger influence is that, and I noticed that there's another guy that I met on this tour who was also a tech writer and wrote his first novel. And I think I see the same thing in his book that's here, is that feeling.
Oh, that's so interesting because we spend our time with people who are absolutely can't wait to dive into books, and
No,
they
and I
buy
love them.
they buy multiple books at a time, and they live to get lost in books and so forth. So, but that's reading for pleasure, and
Yeah.
reading for work, a different thing. Do you have that? You're a terrific reader, but when you're having to read for your job at the hospital, do you have a resistance?
Oh, absolutely. I have to read, hundreds of pages of technical jargon to be able to build in our application. So I have to, and it is. It's a lot more kind of advanced, very practical reading, not really very interesting. So you have to keep yourself really focused on what you're reading and making sure you're going through and they've got their recommended steps and everything. But you have to kind of pull all that out, and it can be very very dry. Um, but it's also very interesting because there's so much that we can do with technology now. But I always find it very fascinating that we put in a certain level of, the idea that technology is going to change fast enough that we now make our devices rather consumable, and they only have a certain lifespan. So then I was thinking immediately about her chip, and how did you make sure that maybe that chip had a longer lifespan than the year or so that we might actually use a particular chip?
Well, what she's counting on in the book, and there is a character at the end who raises that exact point, basically says, well, you can't convince me that a dumpster doesn't solve this problem, right? She just refuses to get excited. But what Ruth is counting on is a pretty well-known behavior of mid-level banks, which is to be cheap with their technology, right? And that's actually why her back door is of value, because she knows that the machines sitting behind it are 20 years old and, easy for her to break into.
Sounds like publishing.
Yeah. Well, yes, the next book shall be a mean book about publishing, although I will not. I do not wish to anger the publishing industry. But so she knows, that this is what she needs to do. And also, she steals that money over a period of, 3 or 4 years. And but there is a tremendous amount of legacy stuff out there, and it's kind of a sedimentary process, right? So even when people come out with new things that they put on a network, they almost never throw away the old things. I mean, they do. There have been, and I'm old enough, I got into networking when we were converting the NSF net to the internet and we were tearing up. We used to cut people off if they did business. If we caught them making money on the network, we took away their service. We had to. And so it was this big deal when suddenly you could sell things. And so I've lived through that whole conversion and the multi-protocol networks and all our silly printers and our Apple Talk and our everything. So there are things that die eventually, but boxes only die when they have to, and banks really, especially smaller banks, they keep things around, and she understands the behavior of that customer. And who doesn't love a bank robber? I mean,
And there's certain software that I would like to call unflushable. You can't get rid of it even after you no longer use it because of that legacy data that you might have inside.
Yep. Exactly. And you open people's drawers and there's a floppy disk in there.
No, I found some discs today. I was all excited because a couple of them were, author videos that I thought were gone, and I took them into Rob, who's engaged in this whole project, and he said, "I don't have a DVD player anymore."
I know a place.
Well, he could, but I thought to myself, okay, they've been in my closet so long, they got lost under something. And another thing, though, that's interesting is that he's now applying AI to improve these really old videos.
Mm-hmm.
And it's amazing how the quality of the video and the sound has, we did our first event like this in 1995, okay? So we have that really terrible, Speedy James, really terrible video. I mean, you could hardly understand her, and, the color was awful and all the rest of it. And when he got through, it's like we did it the other day. I could hardly believe it. So I think what's interesting there is that there's new technology that can improve old technology.
Yes.
Was the reason I brought that up. So even less reason to get rid of some old stuff if you can, in fact, reuse it, so to speak. I love it. Are there any online questions, Patrick?
Yeah, there are. Let's see. The question is Ruth at all like you?
I have not asked you that on purpose.
I know. Well, so yes and no. And it's probably more of a no than a yes, because if you were going to write a 10-point description of her, she's a thief, she is not a caretaker, she is isolated, she has this obsession with fancy food, she's a runner. I mean, all of those things, no. So that's not me, and people keep trying to, she has a thing where she thinks that she is very, very interested in very fancy food. It's one of her fantasies. When I figure out how to be rich, I'm going to eat these crazy meals, and she spends time, and especially she kind of redirects when she's under pressure. And people are now thinking that they need to feed me these elaborate meals, and it's awkward because I don't like it. But the other way of thinking about it is yes, because I wrote her, and so there's a ton of resonance with feelings that I've had, with experiences that I've had. She sees things that I've seen. And I don't think, and I'm a total beginner novelist, so to pronounce on writing novels is pretentious, but I'm going to do it. I don't think that the characters are very good if you don't resonate with them when you're writing them. If you're just guessing, I think it shows. So in that way, she's like me, because the feelings that she has are feelings that I have had. And some of the snarky stuff.
So you have a feral side, is what you're saying?
Yeah, probably. I mean, probably. No one's here to argue with me, but yeah, and those feelings, and there are some things that she sees or thoughts that she has that I straight up gave her out of my experience. I love truck stops too. I mean, the book reflects preoccupations of mine. Weird food in truck stops. You can always find me looking at the sauce in the grenade bottle and wondering, I wonder what that tastes like.
And it's interesting looking at the books that they choose to sell, how they market long-haul truck drivers. all the videos that they sell and the books and
Everything in a truck stop. The world's largest truck stop is on Interstate 80 in Iowa. Have you been? Isn't that amazing? I couldn't get her there. It was too far. But I really
Too far from Idaho.
yeah, it was too far from California because the whole book is 10 days and you just anyway, but it is an amazing, right? I mean, there's a movie theater. There's a doctor's office. Can you imagine?
I know, and they have showers and bunks and
That's in all of them, though. This
Is it?
place is like a city.
is it really possible to disappear?
Yes. People do it. Absolutely do it. She doesn't quite do it. And I think there are a lot of reasons for that, including that she's ambivalent about it. But for sure, people disappear.
any tips?
Well, you have to be more self-aware, I think, than this character is. You have to be a lot more self-aware. And I think you have to be that has to be the only thing you care about, right? You start caring. Now I'm sort of sounding like some fake Buddhist and like I wrote some other book, but I think, and her issues and the things that slow her down are it's when she starts getting connected to things. So connection is the enemy, but she's not a highly connected character, I don't think.
I wonder too, you think about it, of course I watch too many British crime programs, but as far as I can work out, there's nowhere in England that doesn't have cameras.
That's true.
And with facial recognition and, every English show, cop show, whatever it is you watch, the first thing they do is, go around, grab all the cameras. And so rural Idaho, you're fine. You probably aren't going to run into huge numbers of cameras, although they must have them on 80 and in truck stops. I can't believe that they don't have.
Well, and they check them
Yeah.
in the book. And I looked at them. You can, some of the cameras you can look at, and that's how I was able to decide what they would be able to see when they're looking. I think that there are probably kind of two modes. One is to keep moving and one is to never move. And they both have their risks, right?
Yeah, remember Tom Perry's book, The Old Man? He's been hiding, in plain sight for a long, long time, and then something trips,
Right.
and then he has to go on the run. So he has both those modalities in his book.
But when we learn about it, it means they've made a mistake, right? Yeah. So, but yes, I think it's still possible to disappear. I wouldn't choose the UK to try and do it because there are
There's
cameras
also
everywhere.
the angle of faking your own death. That's one route. You get people to stop looking for you because they think you're no longer alive.
There are crime novels built on that,
Yeah.
steal, hit a cemetery, steal the information of the 2-year-old under the headstone and
There's
that
a
kind of thing.
documentary right now saying that Jim Morrison is still alive. Just came out. Seems improbable to me.
You mean they're going to dig him up at Père Lachaise?
No, they're saying he's living in Vermont, like,
oh my God.
No,
but they could refute that if
Yes,
they dug him up
maybe.
at Père Lachaise.
Exactly.
If they still has
Someone's
DNA evidence.
there. Yes.
The world, it's unbelievable the number of completely crackpot theories and memes and so forth that are floating around all around us.
And it's almost not funny anymore.
No, it's not funny.
Yeah.
Critical thinking appears to have disappeared for an extraordinary number of people.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, we went into the weeds on that one. Do you have other questions?
It was very short, though. Short
Okay.
weeds. Let's see. Well, there was a question. I've lost it here, but people are really curious about the falconing routine. Can you give us just like a very 101? What does falconing entail or falconry entail?
Well, so it is a hunting sport, and you're hunting with a bird. And I think the technical definition, and I can hear all the falconers who are not watching this screaming, but you're taking wild quarry with a trained bird of prey. And within that context, there are a couple different ways to go about it depending on how you want to acquire your bird. And, all around the world, there are different rules or no rules that apply. In the U.S., you have the option. There are people who breed birds custom for falconry. Some of them are hybrids. Some of them are not. Generally, if you buy a bird, you own that bird for life. You are not able to release it legally. And that's partly hybrids we're not supposed to release because they may outcompete the native birds. And some of the birds, depending on how they're raised, are disadvantaged if you release them. So they're not going to survive if they've imprinted on people or whatever. So it's complicated. But basically, you're working with a juvenile bird that you have acquired somehow. Me, I have found it, out in the world somewhere where I have a permit to trap. And depending on the kind of bird, the way you trap them is different. Red-tailed hawks, we use a balchatri trap, which looks like a gardening hat made out of quarter-inch mesh, and there's a floor, and you stick something that's going to move and draw them in, like usually a gerbil or a mouse or something, and you've put noose all over the thing, usually made out of fishing line. And so you find your bird, you toss the trap. It's very similar to publishing in the sense it sounds cool, but you spend a lot of time wondering what the hell's happening and waiting, and nothing happens. So there's another publishing analogy for you. But you wait, and then if the world is perfect, the bird sees it, comes down, hits the trap, and gets snagged. And then you have to remove the bird safely from the trap, and you put gear on it, anklets and jesses to control its movements, and then you start training the bird. And that's a matter of basically, simply getting it hungry enough that you can give it something that it wants, which is food. And then it realizes that you are a source of food and that you're not dangerous. And you build a relationship where initially you're just feeding it, and then it's coming to you. And when it's reliably coming over a distance free, right, so it can choose to leave, then you go out and you start fleshing prey for it. And that's a cool thing, and that's a thing that goes wrong a lot too, because you let them go and they can leave. They can always leave when they're hunting. They don't have to come back to you. But if you're out in the field, and then there are different ways that people who use true falcons, those birds are usually, this is me showing you, they're up in the air, high overhead, and they're watching for you to flush a duck, and then if it's a peregrine, they're diving at 200 miles an hour to hit that. And they're coming over you because they know that what you're trying to do is flush game for them. A red-tailed hawk, different styles. But again, you go out hunting with them, and they learn. You go hunting together, you get to kill something, and they get a good meal, and then you go home and do it all over again.
You could read H's for Hawk too, if you want to.
That's a pretty good. She is known to be a very skilled falconer.
Mm-hmm.
The challenge. That is mostly a book about grief.
It
so
is.
The people who come to it for falconry sometimes get frustrated that their feelings. But it is.
Yeah, but it's pretty basic, though. If you want to,
I'm going to pitch another falconry book. It is a beautiful book, self-published by a British falconer that I know, called Onward, and it's on Amazon, and it has a beautiful cover, and it is a great account of falconry in the UK. And he is an active and skilled falconer, active today.
It seems like
places you can go. I've mentioned this to all of you, but one of my favorite places in Ireland is called Ashford Castle, and they have an active falconry program there. And if you're a guest at the castle, you can sign up and you can go down to the mews and, do the whole bit. My only other experience with it is we were in Sharjah for the Sharjah Book Festival. They drove us out into the desert, spread out the carpets, did all the food. But there was a guy there who was a falconer, and he let any of us who wanted to. He would put the big glove on us and the whole bit. His birds were clearly very well trained and not likely to disappear. So you could have that brief experience of having the bird on your arm and then, the bird. And it was thrilling. It really
It
was.
is thrilling.
Yeah.
It is.
It seems
thrilling.
like a really unique relationship because do you develop an emotional attachment for the birds? It's almost like you're participating together.
Yeah,
In
and
a
it's
sense.
so, and I think there's a range. For me, I mean, it is very interesting for me to interact with non-human creatures and the non-domestic, like the truly wild animals, are very, very interesting, and animals that aren't mammals too, because even wild mammals, there are certain traits that they have where you can build relationships with them, and you do in a way with the bird, but it kind of stretches relationship because there's some exceptions to this, but mostly they really don't care about us. The Harris's hawks are a little bit different because they're a social species with each other, and so they can get a little desperate. My Harris's hawk this year would make social calls to me and interact with me, but if you'd given him a choice, he would rather not talk to me. He was doing it because he had to talk to somebody, and I was there. But you can forget that because we're sentimental, and we have all these feelings, and the birds don't. And so I think it's fine to have all these feelings. It's a human thing to do, but it's forgetting that they're not coming back at us. That is what can go wrong with them. The birds don't.
Did you ever see Grizzly Man?
Yes.
That's a prime example of that.
Exactly.
See what, Patrick? I'm not sure we
The
can hear you.
Herzog movie,
Oh my
Grizzly
God.
Man.
I was rooting for the bear like 10 minutes into the
Well,
film.
you picked the right side. The bear wins,
The
kind
bear
of. I mean, all those bears got destroyed, so I guess they didn't
Oh,
win,
man.
right? But briefly, they win. Yes, exactly that. We're sentimental creatures, and we forget.
Anybody? Anything else?
What do you like to read? Who are some of your favorites? Are you a big crime fiction reader, or
I am not a big crime fiction reader.
This
I'm
is sort of an accidental crime novel, isn't it? In the
Yes,
sense,
it
you didn't
is.
start out to write a thriller.
I didn't, and I was surprised when they called it a thriller because I, of course, was not thrilled. I knew what was happening the whole time. So I don't find it a surprising book at all because I wrote it. And I was naive to the genre. There are some writers, obviously, that I really like. I mean, I'm looking around at your shelves here, and I actually have read quite a bit of what I see. But I read everything. I like a lot of nonfiction. I'm reading a search and rescue handbook right now. There was a guy who noticed patterns in how different kinds of people behave when they get lost. And he built this massive database that's now used to drive search and rescue because you can make about an 80% guess based on the characteristics of who you're looking for,
Yeah,
what their choices would
There's
be.
a book out by Amity Gage called Heartwood, which is basically about a woman who gets lost on the Appalachian Trail in Maine. And I think that whole thing you're talking about is in part how it is a thriller, whether they can find her or not, and what led her to go off the trail.
So there's a source book for all that called
Yeah.
Lost Person Behavior,
Okay.
which is this guy who put together this massive database so that now if you're looking for somebody who has early onset dementia, they go straight. And if you're looking for somebody with this other set of characteristics, they usually will turn left. And the whole thing, it really guides anyway. So I read a lot of different things.
this question has come in? It's almost like a Zen koan. It says, Elizabeth, if you fainted while holding your hawk, would he be concerned?
No. About my well-being? No. He'd be concerned about the ground coming up. The question is, do I continue holding on to the hawk? If I fall and hold on to the hawk, that it first off could injure it, but also they will take that as dangerous, and so it will actually damage. People trip. And my sponsor actually used to fall down all the time, and he was this huge man, and he'd fall. And his bird did not trust him because when it was on the glove, it wasn't safe. And so it's a bad thing to fall down carrying a hawk, and people do fall in the field, and it's a big discussion point. But it would not worry about me, and it might eat me if it could. I'm not natural prey, but that much meat,
Might
if
turn
I'm
on
bleeding.
you in the right moment.
Mm-hmm. Eyeballs.
There's a lot of potential here for future books. Really have
You
to
can
love
ask
that.
a lot about the falconry book. Yes.
Well,
That's a great question, though.
it is a great question.
No, I think in the way the question means, the answer is absolutely not.
Or he would be concerned, just not about you.
Yes, about itself.
Yep.
Its own safety.
I love the way we get questions that he's monitoring Facebook and YouTube
that's
to
what I'm
see.
looking at.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think
on his
that's
phone
great.
to see how all that works. That is surprisingly interactive, this technology. Yeah. Anything else, or should we wind it up?
We should probably wind it up.
Okay. Well, I want to thank you, virtual audience, for joining us, and thank you, audience here in the room, for joining us. And mostly,
Yeah.
let's thank Elizabeth for coming to see us.
That was really fun.
It was fun. Great. There were some great discussion points there.